So are you into brightly coloured or unusual begonias? Are you thinking about getting into begonias and you've heard all the different stories out there? They're too difficult, they're too easy, they grow like wild, they don't grow at all, they can go towards root rot. Stick around with me, and in this video I'll show you the begonias that have had the sticking power to still be in my collection many years later. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanttygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So as I just mentioned, this is a video where I'm going to break down the last begonias that have survived in my collection. And that's not in any way to throw any shade towards begonias, but I've had my fair share of begonias over the years, and I have loved every single one of them, even the ones that might not be with me today. And I'll dive into that in just a moment in a bit. But these are the ones that are still around. Many years later, I think I've been kind of collecting begonias pretty much since I first started on my journey this time around, because the people that have been here for a while know that I've been into tropical plants and tropical houseplants since a very young age. But for this time around, these are the ones that have still made the cut in my collection. So without further ado, let's have a look at the first begonia. So we'll start off with a crusty musty one, mainly because I cannot pick up the mother plant. This is a propagation. You might also notice it got so dense in terms of this growing habit at the top that I had to put in a spike so that water can actually reach the actual soil level. But let me show you up close what this begonia looks like. And some people that have been here for a while will not be surprised that I'm going to be starting with this one. So hopefully some of that detail on those leaves might be coming up there, and you might be able to also see on the stem right there. This is the Begonia sizemorea. I think there's also another name for it. I think I've seen it kind of floating around somewhere. If I find it, I will put it at the top there. But I bought this many years ago. This is probably, no, this specific plant, the mother plant, which is still with me. I just can't move it. It is entrenched in shelving units. This propagation of the mother plant, or the mother plant itself, I would say, has been in my collection probably coming on to 5 or 6 years now. So it's been going for a very long time, and that should tell you something. When you start hearing people with begonias telling you that they've had the same plant, not propagates of that plant, but the same exact plant in their collections for many years, that, at least to me, signifies a begonia that you should be paying attention to, because it means that it can potentially survive in certain conditions, basically, and it's not the hardest thing in the world. Obviously, there's caveats here. Not everybody's care is the same. Not everybody's environment is the same. But at least from the people that I have spoken to that have actually owned this begonia, and obviously I have just recently watered, so it's dripping all over me, they all agree that this is a relatively easy begonia for them to care for. Is it the most exciting begonia? Maybe not, but you can kind of see, so that is a leaf that has kind of aged quite well. That's probably about a 1 or 2 year old leaf. That's a slightly younger leaf, so you can kind of see the silveriness that's happening around there. It's probably not picking up on the camera, but that lighter green that you can see on there, that is kind of like a silveriness. The other thing that people do not talk about when it comes to this specific begonia is that in the right light conditions, and it means it needs to get light from a specific angle, and it needs to be a relatively dark situation, and I know other people have spoken about this, this can have a blue shade or blue cast to the leaves, which is very cool. I know a while back everybody wanted the begonia, was it Pavonina, which had, I think, the ultimate catfish of begonias, I think, from back then, where it wasn't like everybody kind of assumed that it's going to be blue most of the time, but it's, again, one of those things that gets a bit of a blue cast. There's a lot of interest in those types of plants. I'm trying to think now, or I think it's the oil slick fern, Microsorum thailandicum. I think I might be wrong with that one, which I still need to get. I know everybody's just like, they do come up on occasion. I know, but I don't want to spend that much money on a fern. I know everybody says it's relatively easy. I will get it, I promise. It's just not happened yet. It won't be happening just now before I go on holiday. It'll be after I get back, potentially. But Yeah, this is possibly one of my longest running begonias, and I still love it. The mother plant is one of the few plants that I have nicknamed Chewy, as in Chewbacca, for obvious reasons, because of the hairiness. But the one thing I will say about this plant, and you can see kind of what's happened there, this had a lot more leaves. This was definitely a plant that I would have been easier to pick up the mother plant than the propagate about a year ago. This had taken over an entire shelf. It had 50, 60, 70 leaves. It was huge. It was a very low-lying plant, so it took up most of the shelf. It didn't particularly like the winter. I was also kind of getting to the point where I'm just like, you're getting a bit cumbersome, so if you kind of die back a bit, that's fine. There's an awful lot of stuff on here that I probably need to get rid of in terms of rhizomes that might not be doing so well at the moment. There is, however, a new growth point that you might be able to see right there. And that is the one thing I want to talk about. They come in very, very hairy. It's almost like a little bit. It's so cute to like go over the little like hairy bits. But the one thing that I will give as an advice to this, at least in my experience, be very careful on how you water this. Not quite as extreme as African violets or gesneriads, I think, as a whole. But with this one, you want to make sure that you're not watering, you're not getting the new growth, the new leaves that are coming through wet. Try to avoid them if possible and kind of try to water somewhere away from that new growth, because I find 9 times out of 10, if they get wet, it will drop off that new growth point and then you're going to have to wait for the new one. So that is the one thing. But yes, I have grown this in soil, which is what this is. Same with the mother plant. I had cuttings of this and I'm growing this in semi-hydro in a south-facing window, and it's doing absolutely fine. Now, the one thing I will say about this in terms of light, I think it's relatively forgiving for a lot of light conditions. Again, probably the reason why so many people have got it in their collections. Is it the most interesting begonia? As I said, probably not. But I mean, look at the back of the leaves. The back of the leaves have a lot of interest for me because there's some redness. It's kind of that, what's it called, the like photo negative of the front almost. But yes, very, very cool plant. Easy to take care of. Adaptable to a lot of conditions I found in my experience, because the propagate that's in semi-hydro is actually just sitting out in my household conditions, completely fine. And I've grown this in household conditions before and it's completely fine. So yes, the Begonia sizemorea has definitely got my seal of approval. I've also loved this plant so much, I don't know if you might be able to see, and I know some people were still trying to guess, but this is a Begonia sizemorea leaf. I like it that much that it is now permanently on my skin. The next one is quite small, and I'm showing you the struggle buses-ish first before I show you the... I'll end on a big note. Don't you worry about that. But this is the Begonia amphioxus. And it is a relatively small growing begonia. You can kind of see what makes this unique. It's very similar to something like the polka dot begonias that you get. Just think of it in a much smaller size. It's still kind of a cane growing type begonia, so what we were looking at before with the sizemorea, that's a bit more rhizomatous, so it's a bit more low lying. This one does tend to grow on canes, and this is one that again came into a lot of people's attentions a while back, and they were a bit unsure because a lot of people were saying, you know what, this desperately needs to be in a terrarium situation. Now, and I have given my two cents on this a while back now, it doesn't need to, it really, really doesn't need to. I've grown this quite happily in regular household conditions. The thing that I will say, and I've said this in the past as well, if you're trying to grow this in a household condition, especially if you've bought it and it's come from somewhere that's got very high humidity levels, this is going to look like rubbish for a good few weeks or months. And maybe you might be able to see that one leaf there. So what you're seeing with this specific version of my original plant, so this is, I don't have the original mother plant anymore. I have it's got so big and unwielding at some point that I had to gift it away. I've also had propagates of this that I've taken to plant swaps in London, and the people were really kind of keen to get it. This is one of the last few propagates. I think I've got more. There's always some version of this being propagated in my prop boxes, and it's growing quite happily, and it will grow in prop boxes without me having to do anything for it for years. But this is, you saw that leaf that was crisping up. That is the reason why I moved it out of a very high humidity situation, which was the prop box, into here as well, which has still got relatively high humidity, and it still took a beat. If I was moving it fully into household condition, which I have done before, it will crisp up even more. So as long as you can give it some light, maybe tuck it away so you can't see it looking a bit busted for a good few weeks or months, and then eventually it will come back much stronger and be fully adapted to your space within that humidity level, then bring it up and give it center stage. That's absolutely fine. But there is that you need to remember. The other thing which I would be remiss for not saying about this plant is it ships like rubbish. And it is a thing that you need to be aware of. If you're going to be buying this, likely you're going to be buying this online. There was a point where I saw these in some garden centers and plant stores, but likely you're going to be growing this in, you're going to be getting this in the mail, basically. You're going to be getting it online, except that when you're going to get it, it might be in bits. This is super, super fragile. The stems are super fragile. The leaves are super fragile. However, the one thing that I will say is that this specific plant propagates like a dream. It is one of those begonias, and a lot of people find the begonias can be quite easy to propagate. The sizemorea that I was talking about before, it can propagate relatively easily. However, the one thing I will say about that specific begonia is that it does propagate okay, but it takes a long time to establish enough roots to then actively start growing. I'm thinking a few months or even a year. So bear that in mind, and that's coming from a stem cutting rather than just a leaf cutting. I've done leaf cuttings on that one. I've gone and managed to grow new baby sizemoreas from leaf cuttings and the vein cuttings on the leaves, and it does happen. It just takes a very, very long time. It does generally when you're doing propagation from a leaf vein on a begonia, but that one takes a long time. This will so readily propagate, it's absolutely ridiculous. A leaf will drop in the soil and all of a sudden you've got a new growth point without you even realizing it. A few weeks, months later, you've got a new growth point. It's fantastic. So when I first got mine, it was like this, and by the time I was kind of giving up the mother plant, it was in a very, very large pot, and it was probably about this tall. The leaves don't get massively bigger, but it does bush up, and it kind of, because it kind of self-propagates itself in its own pot by things dropping in and rooting out and then get a new growth point, this can get quite large, tall, and quite wide as well. This definitely needs some support because, as I said, those stems can be a bit on the flimsy side, as you can see there. But very, very cool begonia. And as I said, I have had this for years, or some version of this plant I have had for years, and I still enjoy growing it. And you cannot get another plant that, to me, it has always looked like it's something that is kind of poisonous, essentially, or toxic. I just really love the fact that it has got the red dots over the green. It just makes me very, very happy. But yes, the Begonia, amphioxus, definitely a big, big suggestion from me. Coming into an even more unusual looking begonia, I think this is probably the most unusual begonia that I have got in my care. Also, I will warn, because when I show the backs of the leaves, if anybody's got trypophobia, you might want to skip this section and go to the next one, because you're about to get triggered in a big way with this one. But if I show you the front, hopefully this is not going to trigger the people with trypophobia as much, but the thing that I wanted to show you, and hopefully it will come through, can you see that every single one of those little black dots that you're seeing on there are kind of spikes, and they're spikes which end up, and again, I don't know whether or not this is going to necessarily pick up, but you might be able to see, can you see each one of those spikes has got one little hair at the top of it? It's super, super cute. Sorry. Before I get too excited with this, this is the Begonia melanobullata. And the name literally is melano, is dark, or something that's almost black. Bullate, I would imagine it's not an ancient Greek word as far as I'm aware. Don't think so anyway, so it might be a smashing of kind of ancient Greek and Latin, but I think literally just means those spikes, those kind of peaks there. Now, this is the bit that I was saying, if you've got trypophobia, maybe you want to look away. I'll show you the backs of these leaves. So the thing that you need to remember, and this literally will trigger a lot of people, each one of those spikes is actually hollow. And each one of those spikes on the inside, on the back of the leaves, is red. So it's very, very cool. I'll show you what the new growth comes in like. You can see it right there. These two leaves are new. So again, another hairy plant. Can you spot the theme with me and hairy plants, or hairy begonias generally? And people have seen this recently on my channel, but it is growing in a weird kind of almost bonsai-ish way. I am letting it do its thing, like a lot of you said. But this one had struggled, and again, transparency on my channel as always, this had struggled a bit over the winter. And the one thing that I will say about this begonia, and people were saying this to me when I first got it, and I never believed them because it was so hard to come across this. Interesting story, some people might know this already. I was actually looking for the begonia ferox or ferox, and I couldn't find it in the UK for a very long period of time, but I did find a version of the melanobullata. I think this might have been an eBay purchase, and it wasn't a cheap eBay purchase. Now, both the ferox and the melanobullata are a bit more available in the market. You do occasionally get them in plant stores, which is really, really good. I am so, so happy to see that, because there is zero other plants that have this kind of look and feel to them. And again, this speaks to the goth days of my youth with, I don't know if you remember those kind of collars that you used to get with the spikes, the kind of dog collars almost that you used to get with the spikes. This is giving that kind of vibe. It's very cool. But the thing with this one is it grew really well. So it grew, like, all of this had leaves on it, and most of those, something happened to this. I think I might have overwatered it over the winter, and that's the point I was trying to make. This is a plant that I really, really, even more so in the winter than in the summer, but even in the summer, I pretty much let this go fully dry, fully dry, before I rewatered this. And actually I found that for most of my begonias, that holds true. That kind of almost letting it go fully dry. Think Monstera, where you'd want it to go fully dry before you water it. It's the same, and I find most of them do okay. There is a caveat to that, so you need to be very careful. When I say fully dry, I mean, if this plant takes, in the summer, 7 days to fully dry out, I can water it on the 7th day, I can probably water it on the 8th day. If I start letting it go to the 9th, 10th, 11th, and so on and so forth, then you'll get issues, because again, begonias have got very, very thin kind of hair-like roots, but actually this one, even more so than most of my begonias, does really need to go dry. And it always catches me out a bit in the winter. Every winter that I've had this so far, I end up losing some of the leaves. This year was the worst year by far, because I ended up kind of overestimating, and I put it on a schedule. I shouldn't put it on a schedule. We've all talked about this. Every single one of us online has talked about don't have your plants on a schedule, water them when they actually need to be watered. And I think maybe we had some grey days or some cold days, and it got overwatered a couple of times. And I don't think it necessarily got rot, but maybe there was a fungal issue with the leaves. It got treated. There was a point with this plant that it was looking like this, and it had like 2 leaves left, and that was it. So the fact that it's bushed up the way that it has is great. This isn't one that I would advise if you're just starting off, but not far off it actually, to be fair. And difference between this and the ferox, really from what I'm seeing, looks wise, they are very, very similar. The only difference is with the begonia ferox, when the leaves are very, very immature and they're starting off, they don't have any of these spikes. The melanobullata has it from day one. And I will show you some of the very, very young leaves here, and you can kind of see some of the spikes still there. It's giving you that it's on its way, rather than it's not quite at the level of the mature leaves. It's on its way, but you can still see that there's going to be spikes that are happening on there. That doesn't happen with the ferox, so that's the big difference. In hindsight, I am so glad I got the melanobullata. I love this to bitty bits. So yeah, this is one that, again, complete seal of approval from me. I have had this coming up to 4 years, I would say now, actually. I think I got this around the pandemic, so 2024. How did this happen? How did this happen? How is the beginning of the pandemic 4 years ago already? But yes, 4 years, great, still going strong, even with some of the struggles. Shall we finish on a high? And by high, you'll see what I mean in just a moment. How is this for some height? in terms of a begonia. And I know these, like, there's a lot of begonias. I'm thinking the polka dot begonia, and I'm thinking, oh, Johnny. You haven't discovered Johnny yet on the internet. Where have you been? If not, the bearded plantaholic. And if you've never met him, I've had the complete pleasure of meeting him at a couple of events. He is as bonkers and as lovely and just an all-round fantastic individual in real life as you see him online. He's amazing. But yes, his polka dot begonia, I know a lot of people's polka dot begonia is absolutely huge, pretty much a tree at this point. But this is, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you can kind of see it. You'll see some crisping on some of the leaves. This is the Begonia brevirimosa subspecies Exotica. And some people just call it the Begonia brevirimosa, some people just call it the Exotica. I don't know which is correct. I was sold this as Begonia brevirimosa subspecies Exotica. Isn't that a mouthful? Yeah, this is a begonia that... To give some context on this, so there's previous videos, and I'll see if I can find a picture and possibly add it here of how large this was originally, the mother plant of this was. And then I can't remember what happened. Oh yeah, similar pot, similar size, even bigger than this. And remember what I was talking about before about you need to water it and don't let it go dry for days. You do need to let it go dry. I still let this go fully dry, but not for days on end. And I think we had a heat wave and I missed it. That entire plant went south super quickly. However, because it was getting as tall as it was, and even this now, the crisping that you're seeing on some of these leaves, like there, and I'm trying to see if there's anywhere else so you might be able to see. And here is because this is sitting on the shelf behind the camera, but very, very close to the top glass, and it's just touching the glass. And when it gets heat waves and it's really, really sunny, it just crisps up the edge. Ironically enough, a lot more resilient than you might think, but because it was doing that for such a long time with my previous plant, I used to take cuttings, shove it into a prop box, and literally this was all the prop box propagations from that one. That plant would have still kept going if I hadn't messed up with it. But the prop box, just to give you some context here. So if I show you, can you see these two little leaflets here and maybe like a small little growth that's happening right at the bottom there? Every single one of these stems, there are multiple stems, every single one of those stems was that size 3 months ago? Maybe 4 months ago? At most 4 months ago. Like a weed. By far, one of my most consistently and fast-growing begonias, hands down. Hands down. Absolutely insane. I have had the polka dot begonia years ago. That grew relatively fast. It still did not grow anywhere near as fast as this. Does anybody else have this? Because I know some people have had this or have recently got this. How are you finding yours? Because I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that has found that this grows like a weed. As soon as you make it happy, it grows like a weed. Like I don't know, for the people that might be noticing, this is janky support sticks for the win, and it's also got metal plant ties holding the janky support sticks together. Otherwise, this will just like snap. So there is that to remember. It's definitely a cane begonia. You can all see it, but I just can't get over this. This is a plant that to me looks like it would be fake, because the only bit of green that I can see is those veins in the leaves, but everything else is this kind of like deep pink color. And apologies for anybody who's a huge fan of like the philodendron pink princess, but if you want a pink plant, this delivers pink. It's a specific type of pink, but this delivers pink. This is another one that, like the philodendron Florida ghost, which has those entirely white leaves and then eventually kind of darkens down to a green, where you just sit there looking at it going, how have you got enough green to photosynthesize? I don't understand. But yeah, the Begonia brevirimosa subspecies Exotica, just. And I think I've had this again since 2020. And as I said, some of it kind of died back and I had to restart from the propagates, but the propagates again, I left them in a prop box, did not do anything to that prop box for about a year. They pretty much rooted and stayed in place. And then a year later when I'm just like, oh, I'd like to like kind of get that growing again. Ta-da! Insane. I've still got some of those propagations in there. That entire prop box is pretty much Begonia brevirimosa at this point. It's but yes, and had I have not have messed up and had I have maybe up potted it and had I have maybe had the space to put this on the floor, this probably would be a tree by now. 100%. The original plant would have been a tree by now. So yes, very, very, very cool begonia. So those are essentially by this point, not just my longest lasting begonias, but my favorite begonias. By default, they're still around years later and I still get to enjoy them. And each one is very different and unique. And I don't think begonias get as much love as they should. There are a lot of begonias that are very much suited for terrariums, and I think people find them as there's a concept around them that they might be a bit troublesome, a bit tricky and all these things. That can be true. As I said, I have lost my fair share of begonias, even the easy ones. I think there's the one with like the cross on the leaves, like I can't remember what it's called now. So that one did not do well for me. I had one that was all gothic and I think it was a black fang, possibly something like that. That one did really well. It grew in my household and I think had I put this in the conservatory with a slightly higher humidity level, that probably would still be around, but I lost that one to root rot. Because the one thing that I will say about begonias, which can be quite challenging, especially if you're getting a large plant that's established, it is very difficult to take it home and just go, I'm going to remove all of the really horrendous soil that the grower might have it in to put it into what I know will work better for it. And it's super easy then to overwater. Super, super easy to overwater. So there is that to be said about begonias. I've actually found with a lot of begonias, even the ones that are struggling, if I've been able to take cuttings, propagate them in my preferred growing media, they all do great. So maybe that's a little top tip from this video is if you find that you struggle with a certain type of begonia and you really want to grow it, take cuttings, grow it in the media, like propagate it and move it into the media that you want to move it into, because again, those fine, fine roots, and you should be absolutely fine. But yes, did any of these surprise you? Do you own any of these? You're thinking about getting any of these? Let me know in the comments down below and let's have that conversation. But in the meantime, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.